At the time of the recording of this conversation, May the 11th, 2022, it has been 2 years and 2 months to the day since the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic. A health pandemic that ripped through our lives. A pandemic that upended everything you thought you knew. As M. Scott Peck points out in his book, The Road Less Traveled, the roadmap of your life was suddenly out of date. The first line of his book states, life is difficult, and the journey to self-awareness and actualization is a rough and tumble ride. For all of us who are navigating the COVID-19 challenge, we know this, says Donna Kennedy-Glans, the author of Teaching the Dinosaur to Dance. Businesses, small, medium, and large, are stunned, and they remain stunned as the future of their organizations continues to be uncertain. Kennedy-Glans says, disruption rules the day, and the vain hope of maintaining the status quo is in fact doing harm to many organizations. She says it's time to wake up to some tough new realities and reinvent your organization. I invited Donna Kennedy-Glans to join me for a conversation that matters on how we pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, roll up our sleeves, get reoriented, and then move forward. Donna, welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm really grateful to be here.
Interesting book. What was it about the way in which COVID-19 disrupted our lives that made you say, okay, we need a guidebook or a set of ideas, insights, principles that can move us beyond this and make sure that we're equipped for a continuing uncertain future?
What I kept hearing, Stuart, was everybody was turtling. They were hiding. They were protecting themselves from all the things that were coming at them. And it wasn't just COVID. After a while, it was, and now we've got inflation, we've got a war in Ukraine, we've got supply chains that have been totally upended. We've got different generations expecting different things. We've got polarized conversations. We've got Black Lives Matter fairness expectations. And if you're sitting in an organization, whether it's for profit or nonprofit or government, and you've got all these things coming at you and you're just kind of, oh my goodness, like stop the world, let me get off. And I saw so many people doing that and so many organizations just turtling that I realized people have to move on. You have to move through this. COVID was awful. It was a shock for sure. And you get to do that for a little while. But if you're going to keep running an organization and fulfilling its purpose, you better keep moving.
You know, I remember when, of course, it hit, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, if this is like 2008, my business is done. Like, I'm a small business. And I got ready to shutter the doors. Oddly enough, COVID-19 created new opportunities for us because we were open to them. But the rate of change, now that COVID-19 is changing, I have no idea what that future holds for us. So how, me as a small organization and others in large organizations, how do we start to be able to determine what a baseline might be and then start to move forward?
It's a great question, and it's very practical. Part of this is aspirational. It's aspiring to something. You want to be better as an organization, and part of it is just practical coping and getting through. So what I suggest in the book is that people think about all the asteroids that are coming their way. So you can't just look up at all those asteroids and all those issues coming at you and say, oh my goodness, I've got to look after all this stuff right now, and I've got to be expert on cybersecurity and fill in the blank. You have to decide what's really, really, really important for your organization, figure out who's got the responsibility, and then go back to leading and managing your own organization. So what are you trying to do? Are you a company or organization that complies with rules, or do you want to participate in solving some of the world's biggest problems? And we've got lots of them. You better decide and be really intentional about that. What kind of tools do you use? If you use the same old business tools that you were using 3 years ago, odds are it's not going to be working for you, because we need to do things differently. And leadership. If you are relying on the same leadership attributes and skills that worked for you 5 years ago, 3 years ago, even 2 years ago, they're probably not going to suffice right now. So how do you identify those gaps and how do you fill those gaps? What pace of change is necessary in what areas of your business? And I think that's important. We can't just sit here and kind of go plodding along. It doesn't work anymore.
What you're talking about is an enlightened sense of self-awareness, and one would hope that many organizations are there, but it's very easy to lose sight of that, especially if things had been rolling along for a considerable period of time. Suddenly, we're now faced with these challenges. How do we get somebody to sit down and say, okay, these are the elements that you have to take a look at, and then start to determine what your priorities are and how you're going to move forward? Is there a way of doing that that can work for the individual and for an organization? And if so, and I know there's going to be more than one, but what would be one way in which a person and a company could strive to do this?
It's a really important question. How do you integrate the individual values and priorities and sense of, oh my goodness, we've got to do things differently with the organization? Sometimes it's a crisis. Sometimes there's just no other option. You're in a crisis. And as you point out, I mean, I worked with a nonprofit that just kind of shut down for 2 years and didn't realize that it needed to go online. And that was virtual world is going to be part of its future, not just for COVID, but it's part of, we've become acclimatized to this. Other organizations figured it out and they saw a business opportunity. Cirque du Soleil kind of retorqued itself and said, oh my goodness, we've got a crisis. And it often originates as a financial crisis, and it's something that, gets everybody's attention because there's no money there. But sometimes it's not. It's somebody seeing there's an opportunity there. We didn't see that before. We see it now. Getting alignment in the organization, if the leaders aren't the people, the decision makers aren't the people seeing the opportunity, sometimes that's really tough. Hence the title of the book, Teaching the Dinosaur to Dance. I mean, I'm 62 years old and I play with dinosaurs. I steal them from my granddaughter. This is Rex. He's the really grouchy dinosaur. And I go on TikTok with him all the time. But the idea is that we have to be able to talk to people who are stuck in old ways of thinking and they're afraid of change. Frankly, some days I'm the dinosaur. My kids would probably tell you that every day. But we all have parts of us that we're attached to and we stuck with. So how do I, if I want to make change in an organization, have a conversation with the decision makers to say, look, if we stay in this place, your business is going to run out. This isn't going to be sustainable. The other idea is to say, there is this great big new idea that is out there. We can access it. This is what it looks like. We need to talk to different people about how to access that opportunity, hence the different tools that are available in the book about talking beyond your base core team. So it's how do you teach this dinosaur to dance, to do things differently?
I'm reminded of the concept that ecosystems, understanding how they change, is one of the most important things that you have to, take into consideration. I read an interesting case study about Kodak, and everybody goes, "Oh yeah, they failed because they failed to go digital." No, that wasn't the case. They went digital, and they went digital big time. But the ecosystem change that they didn't recognize was people went to digital viewing for their photographs rather than, just digital cameras and then print. They didn't see the ecosystem shifting. And this is what, so much of what I think you're saying is the world has changed and you got to get in line with it. Otherwise, what you thought your company was about no longer is relevant.
And it's heartbreaking. I mean, that kind of story is heartbreaking. It's people with the right talents that just don't deploy them in an opportunistic way. One of the tools that we talk about in the book, and I like it a lot, is an enterprise onion where you have to get past your own your blind spots. We all have blind spots. We can't see the opportunity that's out there. So we have this tool where we say to people, go to your internal team. Of course, you've got to build trust there and you've got to have the resources, but go test your ideas, not just with the like-minded, but with people who are open-minded, who may not necessarily agree with you, and also people who are going to be critical, and sometimes even people who are cynical. And if you're really going to test and make sure that you're not stuck in, get stuck in polarization, you're going to have to really understand how other people perceive what you're doing now and what you could be doing. Now, give you an example. The Calgary Zoo is an amazing zoo, but some people on that leadership team said having a great zoo isn't enough. We're in a world that's changing. People care about conservation. They care about it a lot, and we should be leading that charge. So how do you transition an organization that views itself as being hugely successful as a tourist attraction and a great zoo into a leader in wildlife conservation? It's hard because you're asking people to change priorities, you're changing budgets, you're changing your language, you're changing some of your value priorities, and you're going out to people that you don't normally talk to say, well, what do we do in wildlife conservation? We know what to do with a zoo and getting making money, getting people coming through the door. And then COVID hit and nobody could come through the door. And then they turned to wildlife conservation, and it's a booming success. And I think those success stories are opportunities available to any organization, government as well as nonprofit and for-profit, but you have to be open to that. And I think that also requires different leadership skills.
Do you have the answer to that question right now? Like, what are those other skills that we need at this time? And I'm asking that out of my own self-interest as well, because I'm trying to determine how do we move forward and, make correct decisions, because you don't want to make a change and have it be the wrong one.
Oh, you can't waste energy right now. That's for darn sure. One of my colleagues that contributed to the book, he didn't co-author it. He contributed a tool, a leadership tool, which is available. We've got a teachingthedinosaur.com website where these are available as well. He has an inventory of leadership skills. And he's sort of saying, well, here's the base case. These are base leadership requirements. If you don't have these, you're not going to lead our organization. And then there are incremental ones that really, if you're going to do work in a world that we're in right now, you probably need these skills. So how do you collaborate? How do you collaborate with others? How did you find me? That's a big question for an organization like yours. If you're just talking to the same people all the time and you've got a very closed system, you're not going to get new ideas. So what does collaboration actually look like? A lot of us think collaboration, I'm giving you one example. There are dozens of different leadership skills, but collaboration often in our minds is, well, I've got this great idea and I'm going to go find people to do this great idea with me. But that's not collaboration. Collaboration is, I trust this other organization. I kind of am interested in what they're doing. I think there's synergy here. I'm not sure what it is, but I'm willing to spend some time to figure out what that looks like. And I won't control the outcome. Now, that's really hard for a lot of people to do, but that's what is required if we're going to test new ideas. And then for the superstars, and there are companies out there right now, like you talk about Disney and running into political stuff. I mean, we got I was a politician for a while, confession. Enterprise trying to engage in the political world, you need to know how to suspend judgment. You need to know how to participate in a what could be very polarized conversation and decisions. How do you do that? A lot of leaders can't do that. I talked a lot about that in the book. I do this blog called Beyond Polarity. I've done it for 5 years. I'm fascinated by our inability to deal with polarity, and we haven't gotten much better, but we're going to have to. We have no choice but to figure this out.
Okay, I have an idea. I want to run it by you. You tell me what you think of this. Because I'm wanting to move into a new area of my business, and it's all going to happen as a result of the fact that COVID came along. but there are aspects of it that I don't know. And so but some are new talents and skills that me and my team can bring to the equation. And I went, okay, how do I reduce my risk on this? Because I think this is the big challenge. Okay, Donna, I hear you, but how do I reduce my risk? And what I've decided to do is to say, well, let's create this new opportunity, but we'll do it through a series of collaborative joint ventures. You, and you, we're all going to come together, we're going to create this. You have a piece of it, we have a piece of it, and so on, but we get to spread out the risk, and we bring talents that none of our organizations have the complete model for. Yeah. Is this something that we could see moving forward, or am I living in la la land?
I love the idea of creating something new and in a thoughtful way, not in a, let's throw everybody in the room and hope that things kind of spew out. I think having intentionality and being deliberate about it, having timelines, having resource commitments, it also means you have to take something else off the plate. And that's another thing in this book is, what do you not need to do anymore? And you really have to have some discipline around that, because otherwise you're just adding incremental, and you can't just keep doing incremental. We lose creativity. We lose energy. It just isn't fun. Decision making around that, how do you govern that process, is a really, really big deal. I find decision making, I'm a lawyer by training, so, and I think that's why I went into politics, because I was always intrigued by who is making that decision for me. That was always a great curiosity to me, but I think it's something we don't handle very well inside an organization. If you come together and you do this experiment or sort of a pro forma idea for 3 months and it fails, is it a failure in your mind, or is it an investment in better knowledge? What's your takeaway? What's your downside? If everything that doesn't move forward is viewed as a failure by you and your colleagues, or especially people who report to you, that's going to be pretty negative. So you have to be able to live with, this didn't work out, but now I have better information and I can make a better decision in the future. That's a really hard thing for a lot of organizations to do, but you have to be able to say that out loud. And there's some honesty about, how are you going to assess if you've got the capacity, the processes internally? Do you have alignment and values that you need with the other organizations to go forward? The what ifs are really important. What if this happens? And you can't imagine all the what ifs, just like, can't imagine all those asteroids, because they just keep coming. Like, who would have predicted a war in Ukraine? I mean, it's unbelievable. But you do have to be able to walk away. And I think, and say, I learned something, I derived something from that, and I will take that knowledge and use it and apply it in a different space. The last point I'd make is, your team may not, and even your collaborative teams may not have all the information you need. How do you test those ideas, the validity of those ideas, with third parties who have better knowledge? Lego goes out to kids and tests its new ideas. That's where it gets its new ideas from. It doesn't sit in a room somewhere and cook up, what's next for Lego. They go out and they ask the customers what they want. And I think that's a letting go. It's just kind of doing things a little bit differently. So I think it's how you frame it up more than anything else.
Well, I also think about something that former U.S. President Ronald Reagan really celebrated, and that was, give it a try. We're so focused on only celebrating success, but we don't celebrate people who just give it a try. And as he pointed out, even if you don't succeed, you may plant the germ of an idea that becomes something else. But if you don't do anything, or if you just, and as you point out in the book, if you just hang on to the status quo, well, nothing new is going to happen.
I believe you're actually harming yourself if you just sustain the status quo. And I know that's a hard thing for some people to hear. I grew up on a multi-generational family farm, where you would think that you would, what place, family farm, you just do things the same way, year after decade after generation, don't you? No, not at all. I mean, I talk a lot about that in the book, because it's so important. My parents had to adapt, and I, oftentimes we don't like to make those changes. We're forced to make them, but not being afraid of them, I think, is actually really, really important, and seeing them as an opportunity. COVID shocked us all, and anything that was, I think it wasn't just COVID, but it was anything that was vulnerable or weak got really, really exposed and accelerated and accentuated during COVID. So if you had a wart, it became, gigantic during COVID. And we're now living with the aftermath of that. So it's harder. I also, and I read about this too, we're not all Elon Musk. I did things as a corporate executive that I think were stupid in retrospect. I went out on too many limbs at times, doing things that our company, I don't think they should have been doing those things. They were just, we were trying to fix social problems in the country of Yemen, for example, or Nigeria. Some of them were okay, but some of them were way beyond the bounds of what a company realistically should have been trying to do. And I'll say that out loud. I mean, I made lots of mistakes, but I learned a lot doing that. And I think just experimenting for the sake of experimenting isn't really a good use of resources. And there are people like that. Elon Musk, again, is kind of like superstar, and he does amazing things, but I think he's quite unusual. He's an anomaly. We need to get some balance in that. So how do you have secure things that you do, that you're comfortable with, that you're solid, and give yourself the space to also do something that's far more creative?
I like the analogy that you used with regards to farming. I mean, farmers are the most adaptable group there is because they're confronted with every kind of unpredictable element of nature that you can imagine, and somehow they got to figure out how to make it work and carry on, innovate, and grow. And as a sector, agriculture, my, oh my, the changes have been extraordinary, and they're a good industry for us to look to. Donna, unfortunately, I'm out of time, but I want to thank you for joining me on this conversation. It's fascinating, and I agree with you. We have to look at the future differently than the way we did leading up to the disruption of COVID-19.
Let's take it as a benefit and use it to our advantage. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.